Hello viewers, in today's video we'll talk about chemical equation and how to balance a chemical equation. So a chemical equation is a representation of a chemical reaction. So in an equation just like this, we can see the formulas, the elements and the number of atoms in the reactants and the product side. So here we have the combination reaction of hydrogen and oxygen to form water. So hydrogen here and oxygen, both of them are called reactants, and water on the other side is called the product. So we have here the arrow indicating the direction of the reaction. So this is read as yield or results to. So we have 2 molecules of diatomic hydrogen plus 1 molecule of diatomic oxygen yields to 2 molecules of water. So again, the reactants are written on the left side of the equation, while the product is written on the right side of the equation. Now the small number 2 written after the element is what we call the subscript. It's the subscript. While this big number 2 written before the element symbol is what we call the coefficient. So we have the subscript and the coefficient. So if we are to balance a chemical equation, we are not changing or touching the subscript. So whatever is the original subscript of the equation, it will be the same after we do the balancing. While for the coefficient, we just add or change the coefficient to balance the number of atoms in the reactants and the product side. Let's learn about the steps in balancing a chemical equation. So basically, we have 3 steps. 1 is to write the equation, step 2 is to count the atoms, and step 3 is to add the coefficients. So for step 1, we need to write the unbalanced equation. So here as an example, we have nitrogen plus hydrogen yields to ammonia. And then step 2, we need to count the number of atoms per element on both the reactants and the product side. So we're going to list the elements. So we have nitrogen and hydrogen. So looking at the reactants on this equation, so nitrogen we have 2. The subscript here is 2. So subscript again represents the number of atoms in an element. So we write here 2. And then for hydrogen, we have also 2. So 2 atoms for hydrogen. Now on the product side, NH3 here, we have nitrogen. Looking here, nitrogen doesn't have any subscript, so it's understood to be 1. So we will write 1. And then for hydrogen, we have 3. So there's 3 atoms of hydrogen. So looking at these numbers, the number of atoms, we can say that the equation is not yet balanced. So what we're going to do next is to add the coefficients. So writing again this equation here. So we have this. We will be adding the coefficient now. Looking at the number of atoms, for nitrogen we have 2 on the reactants, and on the product we have 1. So let's make this 2. So looking here, we can write the coefficient 2 before these elements. So you have 2 nitrogen. Notice that hydrogen is part of this compound, so whatever coefficient you will be adding, that will also affect the other elements. So nitrogen will be affected by the coefficient 2, same with the hydrogen. So we have 2 nitrogen, and the hydrogen now will become 2 times 3, that is 6. So we will only multiply the coefficient to the subscript. So hydrogen now becomes 6. Now let's look at the hydrogen on the reactant sides. Reactant is only 2 for hydrogen atom. Let's make that 6 here. So we can add 3, coefficient of 3. So that 3 times 2 will give us 6. So this will become 6. So now for nitrogen, we have 2 on both sides. And then for hydrogen, we also have an equal number, 6 and 6 here. So the final balanced equation is N2 plus 3H2 yields to 2 molecules of ammonia. Let's have another example in balancing a chemical equation. For step 1, we have here the equation CH4 plus O2 yields to CO2 plus H2O. So this is methane undergoing combustion with the presence of oxygen, which produces carbon dioxide and water. And step 2, we need to count the number of atoms per element on both the reactants and the product side. So let's take a look at the reactant side first. For carbon, we have 1 since we don't have any subscript here for carbon. And then for hydrogen, we have 4. And then for oxygen, we have 2. Now let's take a look on the product side. We have carbon, again it's 1. Hydrogen, we have 2. And then oxygen, we have 1 oxygen here, another oxygen on the other side. This is still part of the product side, so we will be combining the number of atoms. We have 2 here plus 1, so that is 3. So looking at these numbers, we can say that the equation is not yet balanced. So to do the balancing of the equation, we need to write the coefficients. So we will be writing the equation first before we can add the coefficients. So we will write this here. Okay. So carbon is balanced. We have unbalanced number of atoms for the hydrogen. This is 4 and this one is 2. So we need to make hydrogen 4. So we can add here coefficient of 2. So that when we multiply 2 times 2 for hydrogen, this becomes 4. However, notice that we have oxygen here on this compound. So it will still be affected by adding this coefficient of 2. So you will be having a change in the number of atoms also for oxygen. So this is 2 plus another 2 here. That becomes 4. Again, this oxygen, the number of oxygen atoms on this side becomes 2 because of this coefficient. This is 2 times the 1 here. 2 times 1 is 2. Plus another 2 on this side. So this becomes 4. Now making this oxygen on the reactant side also 4, we need to add a coefficient of 2 to make it 4. So when we multiply 2 times 2, this gives us 4. So checking, we have carbon 1, 1 also on the product side. For hydrogen, 4 on both sides. The same thing with oxygen, we have 4 on both sides. So the final balance equation is CH4 plus 2O2 produces carbon dioxide plus 2 molecules of water.